Welcome everyone to the 18th webinar titled Surviving and Thriving in the Post-COVID-19 World, a Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency Perspective. We'll be leveraging key learnings from the W recovery and an introduction to the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium's online 90-day action plan. Please have your cell phone handy or open on another window on your browser and log into the Poll Everywhere website that was sent in the email this morning, the pollev.com website. Again, thank you for your time to join today, Enhance International's 18th in a series of webinars, Evolving the Resilient Enterprise. We are especially thankful for your time today, considering the coronavirus pandemic and its restrictions continue. We hope that you and your family are well. My name is Jim Vries, founder and president of Enhance International Group. EIG is a platform of is a platform of over 40 consultants and consulting companies and SaaS providers dedicated to empowering the organization's workforce by focusing on the partner's expansive expertise. Our goal is to provide collective, collaborative, experienced thought leadership to enable organizations to deliver self-sustaining, positive, high-margin growth. We thrive to deliver 1 + 1 + 1 = infinity. We hope you will find the information useful today, and we welcome your questions during the webinar and after the webinar. Since March of 2020, our webinars are focused on mainly 3 categories: people, process, and technology. In people, we address resilient, rapid skills development, and how to leverage agility for resiliency and for cybersecurity. Under the process side, we've looked at how to build a resilient enterprise, the strategy and execution and growth of a resilient enterprise, and accelerating resilient ideation and launching resilient products, services, and business frameworks. And actually tomorrow we have another webinar focusing on this area. And of course, we focus on supply chain risk and resiliency as we are covering today, in the W recovery and the 3 R's: respond, recover, and review. And from a technology perspective, we also look at the digital ecosystem and how to build it and align it to Industry 4.0 and how to incorporate artificial intelligence into your environment. We've had 3 fireside chats on COVID-19, the visible resilient digital ecosystem, and establishing a resilient enterprise. If you have further ideas for fireside chat topics, please let us know. We'll be having those periodically throughout the year. Upcoming tomorrow, we will have again the webinar on bringing new product introduction growth. And next week will be AI document automation, how to, and 3 simple steps. And then on the 26th, we'll be back here on supply chain risk and introduce you to our online 90-day action plan. Our past webinars are free and can be found on EIG's website, consultingeig.com. The slides that you see today will be sent to you at the end, so don't worry about taking screenshots. You'll receive the slides, and we welcome your thoughts and questions at any time in the chat window in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go along. With that, I'd like to introduce our esteemed main speaker today, Greg Schlegel, founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. Greg, a few words?
You bet. Hey, Jim. Great to be here with you today to talk about our passion, supply chain risk and resiliency. I'll give you a quick thumbnail sketch of who Greg is and We have a slide or two on giving you a sense of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium in a minute. But I'm the founder of Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium here at Lehigh. It's a group of now 30 companies and about 1,500 supply chain risk pros around the globe. We bring tools, techniques, methodologies, and solutions that help us identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks, especially in the supply chain arena. I've been a supply chain exec for several Fortune 100 companies across multiple industries in my 35-year career. I spent 7 years with IBM as a supply chain executive consultant, and I now teach supply chain risk management at Lehigh University, and I teach IRM, Enterprise Risk Management, at Villanova University. So that's a quick thumbnail sketch. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And again, welcome everyone. And just a kind reminder to please open up another window and join our login, polev.com, Greg Schlegel 910, so you can participate in the Q&A questions. Those are often very interesting and thought-provoking. So with that, Greg, kick us off.
Yep. Are you gonna drive the slides at the moment, Jim? That's okay by me, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Yep. Our agenda looks like this, folks. Again, we'll give you a thumbnail sketch of Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, and Jim talked a little bit about the complexion of EIG. EIG is a member of the consortium, so we'll get you grounded there. Then next, we'll talk about let's see. We'll talk about the resilient enterprise. We'll give you some definitions on our point of view about what a resilient enterprise looks like. The next area will be, we'll talk about VUCA. We live in the VUCA world. We'll give you some grounding on that. And then we'll introduce what we call the W-like recovery profile. Next, the Bullwhip Effect. We call it the Bullwhip Effect on steroids. We'll talk to those, to that picture image. Next, we'll give you a little more context on what we call the 3 R's of the W-like recovery. The 3 R's are respond, recover, and renew. So we'll give you some context on those 3 R's, and then we'll move into a couple of helpful hints on surviving and thriving in the post-COVID landscape. And I think that's it. And if we have time, we'll essentially attempt to get into Q&A. And as Jim said, if you have a question, a burning question, just put it in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we're diligent trying to answer crisply your questions of discovery during the slides. Okay? All right. The Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. What does it look like and what do we do? Busy slide. On the right-hand side are the logos, as far as I can remember at the moment, of the 30 different companies that are inside the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. As I said, EIG is a member, and you can take a look at it yourself. But essentially, these companies bring tools, techniques, methodologies, and software solutions, all supporting our book's vision of what end-to-end supply chain risk management looks like. All right. On the left-hand side, this is what we provide. These are our capabilities. We now have 2 online education courses. They're MBA type courses. One is a basic course in supply chain risk and resiliency. The other brand new course is supply chain risk and resiliency in the public healthcare arena. So we're pretty comfortable playing in the COVID-19 public healthcare landscape. Both of these online courses and culminate with a certificate of completion from Lehigh University. The next, virtual training like this. We've been doing about 28 to 30 workshops since the COVID since the COVID environment started. We do 2 or 3 a week. We also do some virtual training, which is in-house training using tools like this. We've been doing classroom training historically for the last 8 years. We have been doing about 25 to 30 workshops, physical face-to-face workshops, whether it's in-house or public, around the globe with our 15 additional event partners. That has been tempered. Most of the online education and many of our classroom education comes with certificates. We also support some certifications in supply chain risk and resiliency, not only from Lehigh, but also for ASCM and historically for TLI, the Logistics Institute of Canada, and several others. What do? We identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks, especially in supply chain. We do supply chain risk management coaching. We lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their journey. We do have some SaaS supply chain risk and resilient visibility solutions like DHL's Resilience 360. We have RAD, we have SureTrack, we have a few software as a service solutions out there. We bring supply chain risk resilient best practices from our book, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we've been working with clients in terms of building out what we call supply chain risk war rooms. So that's a picture image of the consortium. We have grown over the last 8 to 10 years into 30 companies, and on the left is what we provide. Okay.
Thanks, Greg. So just changing path a little bit, looking at overall enterprise, looking at the business as an overall enterprise is where EIG looks at versus this supply chain risk management. And in that, we look at our team of over 30 consultants and companies, look at strategy to execution being that main link that drives the company's ecosystem. And we personified in these 2 geared wheels connected by a chain, with the strategy wheel being, of course, the larger of the 2, moving slower than the execution, where you want to get many rotation cycles out of your strategy. But these 2 wheels are inexplicably linked and in sync. Otherwise, you become derailed. And we all know when we were growing up what it was like to get derailed. And you might have encountered that once or twice in your company. So our job is to help companies scale for growth and support dynamic decision making through coaching, advice, assessments, 90-day plans, problem solving, providing results that last, and outsource needed skills, and online tailored accredited training. At the end of the day, our goal is to enable the companies to be able to stand on themselves and be resilient. And one quote you might want to think about when looking at this slide is from Albert Einstein: life is like a bicycle. To keep your balance, you need to keep on moving. So EIG is split out into people, process, data, and technology. We have aligned our offerings across our partners to provide pinpointed solutions for our clients. Very often there's a provider that can provide maybe a niche. What we try to do is provide complete end-to-end solutions for the client by combining the talents of our different partners. So we want to enable organizations to deliver self-sustaining growth the where, the what, and the how. And with that, Greg, it's off to the resilient enterprise.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. All right. What we'll do is give you our perspective of what a resilient enterprise looks like, and then also just a couple of definitions here from our book. On the top, what does a resilient enterprise look like to us? Our definition in the book is a resilient enterprise has the capacity to overcome disruptions and continually transform itself to meet the changing needs and expectations of its customers, shareholders, and other stakeholders. That's pretty tall order, folks. Pretty tall order indeed. All right. And what we say is any risk. That's rather ominous. We like that definition. And in our terms, in supply chain risk management and resiliency, in our terms, we essentially think of resiliency as the why would you spend any time in supply chain risk and resiliency to become a resilient enterprise. That's the goal. Then below on the same slide here is our definition of supply chain risk management. And we look at it as the what and the how. All right. So the why is a resilient enterprise. The what to do and how to do it, basically, in our view, is supply chain risk management. And it's the implementation of strategies to manage your everyday and exceptional risks throughout your entire supply chain with a continuous risk assessment method with the objective of reducing your company's vulnerability and ensuring continuity. Now, one way to think of supply chain risk management is to think of it as an intersection of good supply chain management and effective risk management. All right. Speaking of resilient enterprises, this is our Longhaul maturity model for supply chain risk and resiliency. We'll go through it real quick for you. Y-axis on the left is enterprise risk maturity from low to high. On the x-axis, from left to right, is 0 to infinity. That's competitive advantage. We have 4 basic stages in our model. Our book is built entirely around this maturity model. First and foremost, on the bottom is visibility. Why is it first? Because most of us don't have good visibility in supply chain. What does that mean? Visibility upstream to all your suppliers and downstream to all your customers. So essentially, we think visibility is the starting point. You need to have good visibility in your supply chain or you're at risk. Second stage, predictability. Might not be exactly what you're thinking. In our definition, predictability is digitizing your supply chain. Why? So that you can start to do what we call what-if scenario planning. If you digitize your supply chain, you can begin to run discrete event simulations one at a time to witness how your supply chain in its present form will react to certain risk stimuli, whether it's demand-driven, supply-driven, or externally driven. So that's what we mean by predictability. Third is resiliency. These are all the tools, techniques, methodologies, algorithms, and so forth that we now have as a body of knowledge where we advocate you begin to inject and embed these tools and techniques that you're going to learn about today into your regular supply chain business decisions. Then the fourth on the far right is sustainability. May not be what you're thinking about. It's not 3-level, top 3, bottom 3. It's not sustainability from a green point of view. It's how do I sustain this journey enterprise-wide for my company? by embedding all the tools, techniques, and embedding what we call enterprise risk management. So that essentially is a definition of the 4 stages. Our mantra, you'll hear us talk about this throughout this session, is identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks. And then below on the x-axis, we like to superimpose a heat map that essentially runs along the x-axis in the model. Meaning, if you don't have good visibility, remember, what you don't know about your supply chain can and will hurt you. So with poor visibility, we think your supply chain is at high risk. As you move up the maturity curve, you can see that you go from high to medium to essentially low risk. And then finally, on the end of this maturity model, we are going to start talking about where are you? And we'll end up the discussion with what we're doing to enhance this model, because we haven't really talked about where are you and your company in this model, but we are going to make some injections at the end of the session today. So that is our enterprise maturity model for supply chain risk and resiliency. All right. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. Great overview. So we decided to pull out an old slide, but a goodie slide, so to speak, of Alliance, a company based out of Munich, Germany, global company that regularly assesses 1,900 risk experts, professionals from 80 countries. I would encourage you to download the report that's on this link and look on where you are at. They have it down to the regional level. It's pretty interesting and enlightening. So, with this report, risk events, cyber attacks, the top 2 here, we're seeing quite a bit today. Cyber attacks are happening and are always ranked in the top 1 or 2, 3 things that are happening for all companies. The following ones: natural disasters, geopolitical, which we're living right now, market volatility, which somehow they've kept it fairly low right now. We've certainly seen fires, explosions, and climate change, brand risk, and the skilling of the workforce of a mismatch of needs what we're encountering with COVID, of course, is playing a big role. So this is a very enlightening viewpoint, and I encourage you to look at the latest barometer for your area, and always keep in mind that 80% of data breaches come through the supply chain. So cyber attacks continues to be one of the most disruptive events that we all need to be protecting for, and also having risk mitigation plans. Another oldie but goodie is the state of supply chain in 2019 before COVID. And the top 3, if you look here, is where people are focusing. They're focusing on segmenting suppliers by risk ratings, identifying potential risk events, and then setting up risk appetite goals. So the risk ratings, we have a few partners that help out on that. Risk Methods is one. And then identifying potential risk events, we have Everbridge. So there are folks out there, there are companies, SaaS providers that help out in each of these areas to support companies, whether they're large or small. Just to talk a little bit about the graph, the green is fully or partially implemented. The red on the right are things that have not been done, and blue is in a pilot mode. So you can see the overall trend and how these are prioritized. Being a continuous improvement person, I've always found it interesting that it kind of sneaks in there, but it never becomes a priority for companies to implement continuous improvement and supply chain risk. Just an observation. With that, Greg, the VUCA world.
Yes, I know the audience is waiting with bated breath on what the heck is VUCA, but it's been around for a long time, and we thought we'd inject it because it's real world stuff, especially when you talk about supply chain risk and resiliency. So let's give you a grounding of the VUCA landscape. What's it stand for? The V is volatility, all right? It describes something that is liable to vary or change with time, sometimes very quickly and often for the worse, all right? Kind of what we're living in right now. The U is uncertainty, again, our existing landscape. This is the state of not knowing or being able to rely on something, especially in our world in supply chain, to rely on both supply and or regular demand. All right, so we're being hit with it every day. The C stands for complexity. This can be defined as something with many parts in an intricate arrangement. I wish I had time to show you, a complex supply chain network, but it's what we live in right now. All of us have global supply chains with nodes, facilities. We've built complex supply chains around the globe, and they're being impacted by the geopolitical global pandemic. And finally, the A stands for ambiguity. What is that? Something is ambiguous if it is open to more than one interpretation. That's what we're living with today inside what we call the W-like recovery, and we'll get into that slide in a couple of minutes. So we wanted to just get you grounded on the definition of VUCA.
So again, looking at where we're at today in this VUCA world, you can see this is the latest dashboard this morning from Johns Hopkins, and as you can see, it's sad to say, the number of cases that we have at 91 million, and it seems to be growing quite a bit in a number of countries: US, India, Russia, UK, France, Turkey, and Italy. And of course, while vaccines are promising, we all know it will take a while for this to come about, at least Q2, Q3, to get to a point where there's enough folks vaccinated. We're living with the tough thing in supply chain, that last mile now, where we hear about vaccines being thrown out. And again, this should not be a surprise to any of us because, that last mile, we've been talking about it for years now, that we got to figure it out. And that we're living that, unfortunately, at this time. So, since we're living in these dynamic times, that are affecting the ability to manage and accelerate supply chain performance of delivering products, especially this last mile, the markets are coming to term of when and what is this new normal we're talking about? What is it going to look like? What's stability? How will we know it? And when will we become predictable again? So how does that affect our supply chain risk management landscape, Greg?
You bet. We thought we'd start real simple and try to give you our point of view of the supply chain risk management landscape. All right. So we always like to start at the top left with a question to you and anyone else who we're talking about or talking to in terms of our passion. And that is, think of it. Where are you and your company in your industry's supply chain? That's the first thing we normally ask a client, even in workshops. Where are you and your company in the supply chain? On the top left, do you just produce raw materials and ship it to another customer? Are you converting those raw materials as a manufacturer? Are you filling and packaging? Are you doing multiple multiple elements within the supply chain? Are you a distribution center? Are you, again, doing multiple elements in the supply chain? Or are you a wholesaler? All right. Or are you down on the bottom right and basically the customer, the end user, the OEM, the customer? So we always like to ask the question and get you grounded in terms of get a perspective on where your company is within your industry's supply chain. Why? Because the icons on the top and the bottom of the arrow are threats and risks, folks. And there's enough to go around for all of us to keep us busy. So we like to get you grounded using this slide as the landscape. Okay, next. We like this slide as well because this comes from a good friend of ours, Dr. Crandall. Used to have a, if you're an ASCM member or were, he used to have an article or a column in the Apex magazine for about 10 or 12 years. Used to teach at Appalachian State. I think he's in North NC State now, but he did a great job, always does a great job of providing insight and then a heck of a lot of resources, like a good academician, all right? But this one, I thought he really hit it on the nose. This gets back to an article he did on 2014 in the magazine, if you still have access to Apex ASCM magazine. I thought this was pretty good. This was basically around the concept of, folks, not all risks are the same. Just like in our business, not all stock keeping units are the same as well. That's how we're trained in supply chain. The trivial many from the important few. I thought this was pretty good. Let's go through it. On the y-axis, what did he do? He put the magnitude and frequency of risk events from low, medium to high. On the x-axis, and I'm okay with this, he took the classic 3 sources of supply chain disruptions. On the left on the x-axis is internal. These are risks that happen inside of your own 4 walls. In the middle is external risks. They are your supplier risks and your customer risks. And then on the right side, on the x-axis, he chose natural disasters, which we're all living with today. And then he put together 2 lines that crisscross. The blue line basically depicts frequency of event from low to high, and the green line depicts basic financial negative impact associated with those risks. So let's keep going and talk about internal risks. Internal risks are essentially what we call chronic risks. They happen every 8 hours, every shift throughout every supply chain facility. They happen every day with very high frequency, the blue line, but tend to have very low financial impact. So we don't fix them. They're called chronic risks. If you move across the x-axis to the next level, these are external risks. These are supplier and customer risks. As you can see, the blue line, the frequency line, reduces dramatically in terms of frequency of occurrence, but the financial impacts tend to rise. And then on the far right, we have our natural disasters. These are earthquakes, fires, explosions, typhoons, cyclones, and now the pandemic, which I think we posted on the right-hand side. And as you can see, the frequency of occurrence for these natural disasters, whether you believe it or not, it's true, drops precipitously as well. But the financial impact just increases almost exponentially. So not all risks are the same. We wanted to get you grounded on that before we move on. All right. So next slide. I think that's you, Jim.
Okay, great. So we went back to the conference board, partner of ours, and we looked at consumer confidence back at the beginning of the pandemic and May 1st of 2020. And you can see that there was a thought that we're going to rebound fairly quickly in Canada, China, Sweden, Germany, Australia, South Korea, Japan. They all thought we were going to get better quickly, where I think the red indicates folks that were a little bit wary and depressed about this. From a consumer confidence perspective, the US, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, in the UAE. So pretty interesting to see. What did we think back in May of 2020? Now, where are we at today? So as we move throughout the year in Q2, we see that we're still at the end, if you recall, at the end of Q2, going into the summer, we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. The number on this graph, 100, is taken from a study in 1985 by this group, the conference board. And what they zeroed in on is saying, well, in 1985, we're going to say that we're at 100. And anything above it is good, and anything below it is bad. So if you recall, at the end of, let's say, end of the summer, we were starting to feel pretty good about ourselves. We're like, oh, everything's going to come back. But of course, in the last few months, that has decreased now. And the last time they did this was in December 22nd, where it hit 86. So, or 88.6, I should say. So the ever since the beginning of this second W, the W recovery, the second hump, that was actually predicted by these guys and John Hopkins and us back in early March, April, we all saw this second hump. If you can see this, it's a little faint here, but this is back in May. So nobody should be surprised that there was going to be a second wave. It was very predictable. You're closing doors, all those types of things are happening. It shouldn't have been much of a surprise to anyone, especially with Thanksgiving. Everybody wants to get home for the holidays. And that's exactly what happened, except it happened even bigger. So that second hump is much bigger, as we're seeing and experience today. So those top 10 countries, as you see below, are the countries most in the VUCA world. And we need to find our new normal. Of course, as we said earlier, the Q2, Q3 of this year, we hope we will come down from this high level of outbreak. Greg?
You bet. So with that, folks, with that input and data, we the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium made a call back at the end of, I think it was, Jim, end of March, something to that effect. March and beginning of April, we made a call and took a look at all the data and made what we call a W-like recovery call with something we call the 3 R's. And essentially, that's what came. This chart came about after we grabbed all the salient data that we could for our clients and our workshops going forward. We rendered an opinion in and around early April. And here's what it looks like. This picture to us is kind of more of a continuum than anything else. So what do we have? On the top of the slide, from left to right, are the government mandates, all right? On the y-axis on the left is our segmentation of the global supply demand arena, which means on the top left of the y-axis, we have our over demand and under supply dilemma. In the middle on the y-axis, we have our baseline, which is basically supply and demand in what we would call relative balance. And then finally, on the bottom left, all right, we have our under demand and oversupply dilemma. On the bottom of the graph, the x-axis, we have our perspective regarding business responses to the demand and supply shocks. We call them the 3 R's: respond, recover, and renew. Let's talk about each phase. The first R is respond. You take a look at that now that you know the graph and its profile. The lockdown and government requirements for PPE, personal protection equipment, early on posed severe hardships on many suppliers of healthcare materials, causing what? Causing an over-demand situation and an undersupply. These suppliers had to quickly rescale and reinvent their supply chains. The secondary effect of the lockdown for sectors other than healthcare was an immediate under-demand and oversupply of product. This led to an approach of evaluating their product portfolios, reducing marginal products, and furloughing personnel to do what? Maintain cash. Because in this type of global pandemic, cash is king. If you don't have cash, we call it a red line issue. I don't care if you're big, small, or in between. If you can't generate cash as a business, you will not have a business. So cash is king. The second R on the bottom, recovery. Again, the government reopening, and now this second surge of COVID-19 cases is manifesting itself into another over-demand and undersupply of what? Different types of PPE products. And those companies who have reinvented themselves are still working hard at reinventing and repositioning their new products for the healthcare channels. Things like gloves at the moment are in short supply, and on and on and on. And in sectors other than healthcare, the phased reopening is now causing an over-demand and undersupply for those companies who have been closed for months or struggling to maintain their product volume, such as now what we're looking at is, cleaning wipes, toilet paper again, and on and on and on. So again, even in the recovery phase, we're still wrestling with the bullwhip effect. And finally, in the third R, renew, all sectors are going to have to do this. They're going to have to look hard at their product portfolios. They're going to have to continue to reinvent their portfolios, continue to rescale their supply chains to deal with existing customers and new customers and channels. This is coined the new normal. As this continuum progresses, folks, it tends to look to us more like a W recovery because of the supply and demand shocks, the latency in the supply chain to rebalance itself, and therefore we all will be experiencing the bullwhip effect for a good portion of 2021. Back to you, Jim.
Great lead in. So we do have a question here. It looks like you've already responded, so thank you for that. It looks like we have where do you feel you're at? You're in 67%, said you're in respond, 33 in recovery, and nobody's in renew. Well, that's an honest assessment, and we appreciate that feedback. And we got one more in recovery. Now we got 50-50. So if anybody else wants to answer, feel free to. We do appreciate everyone responding so promptly here to help the webinar move on. Greg, any additional notes on this?
No, I'm not surprised by this, folks. There's the one element we've seen as risk managers for the last 10 years in supply chain. One thing we have seen that is totally different with this risk event, and that is this risk event is global, meaning natural disasters, we talked about them. Think of it, they tend to be regional. They're in Southeast Asia. They're here in the middle of the United States, you know, tornadoes, hurricanes. They tend to be regional and everyone comes to the region's rescue. This pandemic is totally different. There is no industry sector that we are aware of that is immune from this global pandemic. So this is the novelty associated with this global risk event. So we're not surprised. Different industries are going to be in different phases throughout this year as well. And we hope we can help some of those companies get into the renew and one, survive, and two, thrive by getting into the renew phase. Okay.
So next we'll go into the bullwhip. We've been talking about it. So we are experiencing the bullwhip for sure. And as Greg mentioned, the bullwhip will be even stronger in 2021. I think the backlashes of it whipping and where we overthink through ourselves that we're recovered and we're not recovered, and shortages, oversupplies, all sorts of interesting things happening. So just going back to the definition of the bullwhip effect, it is the uncertainty caused from distorted information flowing up and down the supply chain. So let's start on the demand side. And on the demand side, we start with the customer. And a small change in amplitude on demand will manifest itself into a quite large disruption back through the supply chain. The supply side, on the right here, we have the effect of the supply side of the graph, and the factory can experience a risk event which disrupts the flow of goods downstream to the ultimate manufacturer and its customer. So as you can see, we're having these ripple effects that we have summarized into this W recovery slide that you saw in our placard in this webinar. And we're in this particular case, we're starting with the retailer here over time. And again, here you have the supply demand imbalance on the y-axis, as Greg explained. And in the blue, you have a retailer with a small perturbation change, whether that could be a restaurant or Home Depot or Walmart, a small change there in their SKUs and what they're offering could have a big ripple effect all the way up until the manufacturer sees much larger perturbations. Again, you could run this in reverse where you look at the manufacturer or even go further upstream to the raw materials and say, there's a shortage in a raw material. We run out of a material, for instance, or we have an over demand of that material, and that drives an overall disruption. So that's a little bit of an introductory to the bullwhip effect. And where we believe that this is going to only exacerbate itself in these coming months. So more the reason to look at your supply chain from a risk management perspective and prepare yourself. So up until this time, have you experienced this bullwhip effect? So please respond. We got at least a few folks answering. So thank you. Looks like everybody's experiencing that. So in the light of time, we're at 7 minutes to the end. I think we're going to move on, unless Greg, you have some additional comments here.
No, go ahead. We'll keep moving for the big finish.
All right. Close us out, Greg.
All right, you bet. We said we'd give you some context for each phase. We'll give you some insight from friends of the consortium, which is a company called IRM, Institute of Risk Management. They They essentially shared with us, because they're friends, we work with them. They're a designation, a risk designation company. They're a .org, so they provide education in the pure risk, but they're starting to get into supply chain risk management as well. So they shared the outcome early in April of a global COVID-19 survey across the globe, across multiple industries. We wanted to share a couple of salient statistics with you here, and then we'll give you a couple of COVID-19 helpful hints, and we'll finish up. So in the respond phase, initially at COVID-19 in March and April, what they asked the question, what were your immediate impacts of COVID-19 across multiple industries? The red was major, blue was significant, green was somewhat, and I'll just give you a couple of the top 5. Rapid changes in objectives and works, but of course. Delays in projects, sure. Delays in hiring talent, understandable. Distraction from our key objectives, of course. Loss of sales, revenue, and orders, yes, and on and on and on, all right? Including absences from of employees due to sickness. So pretty much a classic deal, but we wanted to share with you the immediate impacts in the respond phase across multiple sectors. Next picture. In the recover phase, same survey, different question. What factors helped you recover from the COVID-19? I thought this was interesting. Red was major, blue was significant, and green somewhat again. Couple of top ones. Modern state-of-the-art technology. We don't know exactly what that is. Could be good ERP, could be good supply chain management, could be good external risk type systems. We don't know, but they put that at the top of the list. Perhaps that helped them with visibility. Good communication process. In a crisis, you have to over communicate. High quality leadership. In a crisis, it comes to the top. Education and risk management, that was encouraging. Business continuity plans, if you already have them, that's great. You exercise them and you survive and thrive. Work done previously in resilience, amen. Past investment in risk management, this one on the bottom, how to put this one in, this was great, very encouraging to us. Work they've done in supply chain risk management, amen. Next one. In the final phase, the renew phase, they asked the different question. What do you think the likelihood of changes in risk management will come about from the COVID-19? This is kind of predicting to a certain extent. I thought it was interesting. Red or green is very likely, blue quite likely, yellow is neutral. Greater focus on resiliency, greater board interest and risk, and on and on and on. What I like down in the middle is understand risk complexities, especially for supply chains. Focus more on scenario planning, amen. We're big advocates of scenario planning. Risk quantification skills, that's encouraging for all of us in this discipline. Demand for supply chain risk skills, and then an increased investment in risk management. I think it goes without saying, but very encouraging to us in this arena. All right, next slide. We said we'd, you can go to the next one, Jim. We said we'd provide some helpful hints and maybe have time for a question or two. We thought we'd put these two together for you. The one is the coronavirus update. This is from one of our partners, DHL Resilience 360. Take a look at the URL. They are a logistics global company. They have 500,000 employees. They put out for free every day, folks, a picture image on their website about who's on first, what's on second, and what's going on from a logistics supply chain point of view in terms of ports that are closed, ports that are open, and on and on and on. So we wanted to share that with you. From a health side point of view, we wanted to share with you research. You can take a look at the Healthcare Coalition, from a people side and health side. We wanted to share these two URLs with you to give you some insight and help you help yourself. The last two slides. We basically have been saying this all throughout COVID to our clients and our website or our webinar attendees. What do we do now? What do I do tomorrow? Next 3 months, do this. Ensure the safety of your staff and partners. You got to over communicate. Identify key suppliers if you haven't already done it. All right. And stay close to them. You got to constantly talk to them every day. Prioritize your critical materials. We talked about the W-like recovery, where people are reinventing and rescaling their supply chain. Don't be surprised if you pay premium price for logistics, no matter where it is around the world. Prices have all gone up. Watch your cash flow. We advocate explore the Altman Z-score, which is a predictor of financial bankruptcy 12 to 15 months into the future. You can Wikipedia it. All right, it's out there. You can calculate it. And cash conversion cycle. Again, it's in Wikipedia. It's a good measure to watch your cash. Next slide. What to do later in Q2, Q3? Integrate risk management into your supply chain. Map your supply chain. Start small. Get some visibility in terms of your supply chain. Pick a small product line. Identify the risks in that line. Assess those risks. Plot those risks over top of this supply chain map. You can do it manually or use a computer. Monitor your risks. Maybe you start to subscribe to an external risk alert solution like DHL, like Resilience or Resilience 360, like NC4 and so forth. They're out there in terms of providing you external risk identification. Develop scenarios. Think about digitizing your supply chain. Build out risk response plans if you do scenario planning. In case it comes up, if the risk manifests itself, you have a risk response plan. All right. We think we're going to be in the W-like recovery for a good portion of this year, folks. So anything you can do to essentially mitigate that supply and demand imbalance, we would advocate that. I'll turn it back to you, Jim.
And just to close it out, we'll be talking about this in our next webinar, is the 90-day plan, action plan that we've developed. It's an online assessment. And if you have any questions about that, please do contact us. We don't have enough time to go into detail today, but we will address that in our next webinar. And if you want to sign up, please, or just inquire, just send us an email or go to the website and inquire about the 90-day action plan. Just in closing, hopefully you got something out of this webinar about the W recovery and the 3 R's: respond, recover, and renew. We are approaching this new normal, as we've discussed, and it will be different than in 2020, much more of a bullwhip effect impacts that you will see. We looked at some stats. I won't cover those. We've covered quite a number of them. The impact of the bullwhip effect, as long as there's a supply demand imbalance, we're going to have this, and expect shortages and overages in the upcoming months, and also keep in check inflation, that it stays in check. And of course, we know cash is king. And then we just introduced the concept of the 90-day action plan. It's an online assessment, 90 questions, takes 90 minutes of your time, and you get a 90-day action plan. So that wraps it up for us today. If you have any key takeaways, please feel free to type it in here. We're a little bit over. We thank you for hanging on. Tomorrow we'll do a webinar on speed and resiliency, and then on artificial intelligence on the 19th, and then back to here in supply chain risk and resiliency on the 26th. Thank you again for attending. And if you have any comments, feel free to put it in poll EV, or send Greg or I an email. Thank you for your time. Greg, any closing comments?
Well, thanks a lot, folks. We shared a lot with you. We wish you all the best in 2021.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.